Hello everybody, today I am taking a look at one of Stuttgart's forgotten sons. This was the baby brother to the mighty 911 and was on sale for just 4 years, yet in that time outsold the legendary car. Today I am driving for the first time the Porsche 912. First thing about this car I want to discuss is the name. Calling it the 912 was a very obvious reference to the slightly better, faster and more expensive 911, but I'm not entirely sure how I'm meant to say it. You see, 911 is the accepted parlance, and in German the equivalent is 911, which is essentially exactly the same. However, in English-speaking countries we generally call this car's successor the 914 the 914, and nobody of course calls the 911 the 911. So this morning I double-checked, and in German at least one chap called this the 912, the 912. But as nobody has ever called the Porsche the 911 or the 356, I'm really not quite sure what to say. And in many ways that really exemplifies just what a kind of crossover model this was. It was in production from 1965 until 1969, with a brief reappearance for the US market only in 1976. Bear in mind, the 911 had been introduced just a year earlier, in 1964, and the reason for this car's existence was simple. Alongside the 911, at its inception, you still had the venerable 356, but that was a car showing its age. Bear in mind, it had been introduced at the end of the 1940s, and I suppose the logic of Porsche was that firstly, the 356 really did deserve retirement, but that would have left them only with the 911, which had been positioned far higher in the market than the 356 ever was. So, in order to create a new entry point, they made this, the 912, which is essentially a 911 but with the 1.6 litre flat 4 from the 356, here tuned slightly differently and actually making marginally less power. In the 356 it made a heady 95 horses, but here just 90, the reason being it's been retuned for increased torque and tractability. It actually turned out to be something of a hit. In the 4 years it was produced, they sold something like 30,000 of them, and because the car had 100 kilos less over the rear axle, it was considered to be a sweeter, better and more predictable handling car than its big brother, which even when new had already gained a reputation for being a bit of a tricky so-and-so. According to my sources, it's some 100 kilos less that this car weighs compared with the 6-cylinder, and of course nearly all of that weight has been shed from the rear axle. In total, this car weighs just under 1,000 kilos, meaning that 90 horsepower is actually a little bit more adequate than you might expect. If you think about it, it's nearly the power-to-weight ratio of a VW Up GTI. Helpfully, this car also has the optional 5-speed gearbox, and this particular example is a really special one. It's been brought to me by a lovely chap called Praisem, who is a bit of a Porsche fan, but like myself is on a mission to own and drive as many interesting cars as he can possibly get his hands on. He previously had a gorgeous red 964 Turbo, which we tried to review, but due to technical issues couldn't quite make work. However, he replaced that with this and a classic Mustang, both of which I'm hopefully going to get to drive. Well, one of which obviously I have, and provided I return this in roughly the same shape as I was given it, I'll get to go at the Mustang soon. There are several things that mark this out as a particularly noteworthy example. For me, first and foremost, the incredible and original colour of Bahama Yellow, which, though I'm not entirely sure how it's going to turn out on camera, in person is kind of halfway between yellow and orange, and it's sort of peach or nectarine kind of colour. Very, very cool, very 60s, 70s, and I absolutely love it. I can easily see this as one of those colours that makes a reappearance on the paint to sample list. It is also allegedly unrestored. Though work over the years has certainly been done to it, portions of rust have been patched up and the like, it has never undergone what you'd consider a full resto job. Instead, it was in storage for quite some time, with one owner who had it from 1979 until the mid-2010s. In the subsequent years, the car has been bought and sold a number of times, mostly through a chap called Max, who runs a business called Revival Cars, who are 912 specialists. I love how narrow these old cars are. Normally in most things here, any normal modern stuff, a Fiesta, Focus or whatever, you'd be struggling to get two cars through. And this, not a problem. Lastly, it is also a very rare, genuine example of a UK market right-hand drive car. Of the 30,000 912s made in the original production run, just 4% of them are believed to be right-hand drive ones. From that 4%, I don't know how many were UK bound, but the rumour is that today in Britain only 34 are accounted for, meaning this is a very rare car. And as a 1969, we do believe there is a strong possibility that this could be the youngest, the last produced 912 in Britain. That's very, very cool. And given the fact that Praise Him only got this car about a month ago, and I am likely to have driven it today as much as he ever has, I'm particularly grateful to him for bringing it out. That optional 5-speed gearbox has already given me cause for concern a couple of times, because I've gone to move away and the car's just not wanted to pull, and I've thought, oh no, the engine's let go, oh dear, why did this have to happen on my watch? And I've realised actually that's because I'm up about 2 gears more than I thought I was. You think you're in third, actually you're in fifth, and that would explain why it struggles to pull. There is no power steering. This wheel is absolutely huge, but because it weighs next to nothing and the weight that it has is mostly over the rear wheels, actually, you don't need it. Honestly, for a car of this vintage to drive about, it's really, really very pleasant, though you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to wind the windows down just a touch because it is getting a little bit warm in here. We have done our drive-bys with this car already today, and I've got to say, watching this go up and down the road was an absolute treat. This is going to be one of those videos where I'm not really doing a review of the car, I'm just enjoying something and bringing you along for the ride. So sweet, so delicate, this thing. Tell you what though, it does need a few revs to get going. It does seem to bog itself down every now and again, and we do know that the engine is due for a rebuild at some point soon. It is burning oil, this thing. We checked this morning, it does still have some in, but it is working its way through, so that is going to need attention soon. Not exactly unusual, and like many old Porsches a good few years ago, these weren't really worth all that much. Yes, they were rare, unusual and weird, but also the one people wanted was the 911, so one of these would have set you back 10, maybe 15 grand. Today, there'd be a lot more. A nice, decent, restored left-hand drive example could be 70 or 80,000 pounds. A clean, tidy right-hand drive, who knows? All right, let's have some fun. I definitely think this car needs a little bit of fettling. I know it's only got the 90 horsepower and they've been asleep for quite some time, but it should be, I think, a little bit more spry than it is. I don't believe I've breached 50 mile an hour. Oh, crikey. That was the seat just adjusting itself. I don't believe I've breached 50 mile an hour at all in the course of this review. And every now and again, I think it is actually bogging down a little bit. Maybe it wasn't me getting the gears as wrong as I thought earlier. So I'm going to carry on because I'm a professional and I'm driving it already. So let's do that. But I'm going to spin around in a little bit and head back to praise him. However, much of the rest of this car, very, very good. The handling, so sweet, so delicate. Okay, I haven't really got up enough speed to really be concerned about the rear end coming around were this a 911, and it is on period style tyres, not period tyres, but period style. The gearbox is very, very indistinct, as it is with many, many cars of this vintage. However, after a little while of getting used to it, I do kind of know where everything is. The speedo is actually pretty good, but the gauge, which is wobbly, and let's face it, it's a 60s car, it has to have a wobbly gauge. That was the law, is the rev counter. Every now and again, it'll just kind of start flip-flopping around like that. Peak power, I think, comes in at 5,800 RPM, with the red line just after that. when you lift off, it just goes right back down. So that, I think, may need tending to at some point. But you know what? It's charming enough. And I have to say, this car rides really, really well. I don't think I would like to test the limits of its handling, but actually, for a potter, for a drive about, it's really, really lovely. You get that classic 911 style view out of the front with those big light pods, and the fact it is the most amazing colour, I absolutely love. Being a classic in particular, I think it being a bright colour is an absolute necessity because, well, that's safety. God, I like this car a lot. I really do. I actually really enjoyed a 356 when I finally got to drive one. It was a much, much more modern experience than I thought. I've driven a few cars now from this sort of period of 50s, 60s and early 70s, and not all of them are very nice, pleasant or easy to drive, but some of them can be a real delight. And I have to say, this is definitely up there with some of the best. If you compare it with, say, an Aston Martin or a Ferrari of the time, those are more capable, certainly, and definitely faster, much more powerful. And of course they would be. They weren't even a rival for a 911. They were a couple of steps above. But they're hard work. They really, really are. And even stuff like your Lamborghini Countach, that's a notoriously physical car. I remember Harry Metcalf once saying the reason he put electric power steering in his was something that would be understood by anybody that had actually tried to drive one, and presumably loathed by anybody that hadn't. This definitely wouldn't need electric power steering, but as a thing to just hop into and go out in, cool. You know what? For a car that hasn't, oh, blimey. I'm going to wind up doing the remainder of this review, I think, laying down. There isn't much of it. There we go. There we go. Okay, right. Pray for me, everybody. Right, let's try and do a bit of a cheeky, crumbs. There's a tractor up there and traffic there. Okay, right, let's carry on a bit further. The good news is, with this, in most cars, I'm annoyed about the traffic. In this, I am the traffic. So it's not quite so bad. So while I'm doing this, I mentioned earlier that there was a brief revival of the car in the USA. That happened in 1976 and it was called the 912E. That essentially was a reworking of this car. It wasn't identical, the engine was changed, I believe they introduced fuel injection, did a few other small bits. And the reason for that car was simple. The 914, the successor to this car, had been discontinued and Porsche needed a new entry-level model while they were working on what became the 924. So they revived this, produced I think a couple of thousand units, and that was that. But they never sold it anywhere except the USA. Alright, oh crikey. No synchro on first. Okay, let's turn around. And let's go. I haven't stalled it yet, which is good. Clutch pedal is nice and light, easy to modulate. Nope, that was fourth, that's second. Foot down, that's full throttle. There we go. The suspension is certainly on the soft side, unsurprising really, considering you've also got classic, big profile, old school tyres. But it is really well set up. It hasn't crashed or lumped and bumped into the road at any point. And a lot of cars, including modern ones, do it. Certain pieces of this road where they've done repairs, you've got manhole covers and the like. Also love because it is quite narrow, you've got a little bit of adjustability. It's no classic Mini for sure, but it's still a very pleasant thing and does feel a lot more neutral than an old 911. It's been forever since I've driven a proper old 911, 1960s one. I'm not sure I've even done that on camera, but I have done that. And you can certainly feel the difference. In here, it also does feel very, very well put together. In terms of materials and the like, I believe it's exactly the same as an old 911, but it's missing some features and tech. What features and tech it's missing, I couldn't tell you, but apparently it is. You've still got a Blaupunkt stereo with both a long and medium wave. You've got a heater, basically as it is, operated by a little lever down here, same as again in a 911, and that's about it. Workout windows. The 5-speed gearbox was, as mentioned, an optional extra that I'm glad this car does have. And in terms of cosmetics and the like, actually the real work this car needs is on the inside. The dash has started to come apart, very common thing on cars this age. There's a few little bits that need doing, but really it's in very, very good condition, this. Brakes do respond. The car does a fairly good job of slowing down. Didn't screech or lock a wheel when I tried it there, so I'm actually kind of impressed. Often that's the weak point with cars of this vintage, but this seems to be doing okay. I wouldn't want to put yourself in a situation where you really required maximum stopping force with something like this, because if it does go wrong, it's going to hurt. But actually, very, very pleasantly surprised with this car. And yes, of course, prices have gone up. This is simply the way of the market. And to try and make a logical justification for paying 70 or 80 grand for something like this, I really couldn't. But in isolation, this thing is a complete and total treat. Feels far better screwed together than most British stuff of the era that I've driven, French stuff as well, and you can see where Porsche got much of their reputation for quality. Visibility is excellent. You are in essentially a goldfish bowl, and it's a great way to enjoy a nice sunny British day. And yes, it may be missing an iconic part of the 911 experience in terms of that soundtrack, but I think the little flat 4 warble is equally as addictive and interesting in its own way. Happily, Prasim's plans for this car are to keep it as original as he possibly can. This being what you'd really term a survivor. I think to try and do a full resto on it would be absolutely criminal. You'd be essentially ruining a car needlessly. Instead, he's simply going to do the bits that it requires. The engine, I think, is going to be the major one. Of course, sort some of the interior out, and then just enjoy it, which for me is the best possible thing you could do with what is actually a really delightful and charming little car that previously I just kind of ignored. It was one of those real sort of, you know, pub trivia cars where you've got to name something that Porsche made that people have forgotten about. A great car to remember if you're playing the game show Pointless. But actually, as it turns out, it's also a fabulous little automobile. So the 912 gets a thumbs up from me. And I want to say a huge thank you to Prasim for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.